It used up all of my energy.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah. I'm Chad.
I'm Dr. Melissa Wittman.
This is the Autistic Female. I think we had that
We
backwards.
did it backwards. Okay. Flip it again. Are we gonna do it again?
No, I don't. I think for episode 1, that's actually probably that's right fitting.
Do it again.
All right. Hi, I'm Chad.
No. That's not how it goes.
Shit. Okay, you go.
We got to get my sniffles out of this.
Yeah, I don't think we can do that.
I'm Dr. Melissa Wittman,
And I'm Chad.
and this is the Autistic Female.
Nailed it. So we didn't know exactly what to do for the first episode.
Yeah.
But I felt like going back to us being in Florida during the pandemic and you getting the diagnosis, I think would be a really interesting spot to kind of kick off the entire show.
Yeah.
Because then I feel like we can then work backwards and kind of go through your journey in learning about yourself and I think my reflections in that. Do you want to just give a little brief overview before we dive into that of what you're hoping to accomplish with this entire podcast series?
Yeah, so I think a big thing, like just in general, whether it's research or social media accounts, just information around autistic females is becoming pretty abundant. But really, it's around diagnosis, awareness, and then kind of acceptance. And it seems to stop at that. And I'm in a unique position and in a very unique and niche field that can provide tools, brain balancing, all of these different things to make life easier. Because what I have found is, in my experience and so many people I've talked to, is life is just like harder than it has to be, really. And when you can balance out the hemispheres, work on vagal tone, all of these different things, it really just makes life easier and allows you to do the things you want to do without so much difficulty. So this is going to be all about, stories, your perspective, my perspective, current research, clinically what I would do, a whole host of different things. So we're going to cover the gamut of a lot of different things. But ultimately, I just want people to know that at whatever point they're ready, there is other stuff out there. So I don't want it to stop at just, this is it, right? So you and I are both very much like growth mindset and always working on personal development. So it's kind of from that point of view. So for me, with that diagnosis, instead of being like, wow, I suck and I just like have such a hard time doing all these different things, I'm like, oh, wow, my brain is a little bit different. And imagine that I'm in a field that now that I know that, I know how to make those things easier and kind of go more smoothly.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great encapsulation. And I feel like the other piece that you talk about that you didn't mention is like how women being diagnosed with autism so underdiagnosed, and that it seems that people are discovering that women are a lot more autistic than expected.
I'm gonna get canceled.
Well, no, I mean that it's some sort of stat that like
autistic.
90% of autistic diagnoses.
80%. Yeah. So these are great stats to start with. So you're right. The kind of current research is that 80% of autistic women are still undiagnosed at age 18, and that's crazy. That's absolutely not the case for most males. So that's important. And then what I learned, again, I'm in the field of functional neurology, and I work with all sorts of autistic patients, neurodevelopmental disorders, pediatric brain injuries, all these different things. And the very common thing is that it's about a 1-to-4 ratio, that for every 1 autistic female, there's 4 autistic males. Now I'm reading research that they think it's 3-to-4, so 3 males to 4 females. I don't know, we'll wait to see more research if that ends up being accurate, but I would say in my clinical experience, my personal life, talking to people, it's probably about even, which is just like would blow the minds of so many people.
Yeah, I feel like in the 80s or 90s, that would have been like absolute.
Yeah, still to this day, because that's how I was taught. Like what's being taught is still that 1-to-4 ratio, that it's males. But, an important thing to touch on with that is that over the years, all of the research has been done on males until recently. So you have all of this information in the research of what to look for, what does it look like clinically, all the diagnosis, everything was mostly done on males. So of course you're going to have a male phenotype basically. And now there is a female autistic phenotype coming out, and that really differs for a lot of people from the male perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to go too far down the history, but
yeah,
why were women so underdiagnosed? I mean, it makes intuitive sense that generally speaking, the number should be 50-50. So you're kind of 1-to-1 ratio, like makes intuitive sense. Mm-hmm. But are there reasons that women have tended to be underdiagnosed?
Yeah. So they just show up differently. I mean, if you even think of us, we knew each other in high school, right? I ate lunch in the library. I didn't like being in the cafeteria. I ended up quitting high school sports because I could not handle, I didn't fully realize what was happening at the time, but looking back, I couldn't handle a varsity game where it's loud and there's the lights. Like I can still picture the lights and the sounds and the band, and I couldn't do it. I could practice. I loved practicing. Practice, was my favorite, but I couldn't handle the games. So that's just very different than a male is more of an outward. And for autistic females, it's often an inward scenario, situation, feelings, things that are going on. It's dealt with more inward, among other things. So although I think that's better to work on in another episode, because I could go on and on about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like the starting point of this story is us in Florida. We're locked, and there's lockdowns going on. We're with our two little boys. We're in the Villages, Florida, which is a retirement community. We have been together on and off in some capacity for about 20 years. Mostly on, like 95% on, maybe 5% off. And we were in Florida. And what made you sit down to go take that test? I'd like to kind of deconstruct kind of that moment, and then we'll just kind of play with kind of going backwards in time from there.
Well, I was sitting on the couch and you came over to me and said, "Honey, I think you might be autistic."
Were we in a fight?
And I don't even remember. No, we weren't in a fight. You even said it kind of gingerly.
I remember I saw a TikTok.
You saw a TikTok.
I saw a TikTok.
So you were bringing over your phone, but your phrase was like, "Honey, I think you might be autistic." You're like, "There's this girl. She's put together, and she's well spoken, and she's,
Can I comment a little on that? I feel like the stereotype that I grew up with in the 90s was that autistic people, and even when I talked to my parents about autism and stuff, I think their mental model of what autism is a very extreme version of autism.
Yeah, that's why it's a spectrum.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And so it's always felt like, and I think even to this day, when I talk to my friends and stuff about your diagnosis and in the appropriate areas, it's like there's a mental model of being born in the late 80s and thinking through the 90s of the people we went to school with that were autistic. It felt like they were far more on the special needs side of things than they sort of, and so any of my language I do want to be just sensitive to is that some of those were my preconceived notions. So your comment, I saw this TikTok, and it was in my experience, having dealt with what I understood autistic people to be through the 90s and early 2000s as a school age person, was people that often very intelligent, very kind of kooky, for lack of a better word, particular, and most often really gave zero shits about their appearance. Was sort of if I'd have to
it's
do
the ultimate lack of right brain.
Right. And they're just I love reading, or I love Harry Potter, or they were just in their thing, and the rest of the world didn't matter. So what people were doing for going to a school dance or what clothes people were wearing seemed to just be the last thing they cared about. So
I want to jump in for a second on that, because I can so relate to that, but I had enough of a social awareness to know that I should care. But I don't think I actually cared. You know what I mean? It was I had enough awareness to know, and that's kind of it's a misnomer, I feel the high functioning part, but that's what it's called, high functioning, to be able to think, oh, everyone's wearing Hollister polos, that's probably what I should wear. But I don't think I actually cared that that's what I was wearing. So it's kind of that in between. Again, it's that spectrum where I felt like there are people like they really cared about that meant something to them,
like the
for
quote
sure.
unquote cool clique,
Which I
right?
still don't really
Right.
understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I wear like the same thing to work every day. I've 5 of everything.
But for people
And I
listening
would
to
have
first,
loved to do that in high school, but that would have been so weird to do in high school. So like I knew I wasn't supposed to do that.
and I would say though, for people who will learn throughout the show, though, I mean, you
Yeah.
do dress well now, so it's not
Yeah.
necessarily.
But for
like,
work, for my everyday, I love, like
Yeah.
being fashionable and stuff. But for work, when I'm going, because it's like the decision fatigue, I think I have so many things I need to focus on and do at work. I don't want to be thinking about when I'm
Right.
while I'm there.
So
If we go out, that's
yeah.
different.
So I saw a TikTok, and this person was, and not, we're gonna have to do so many disclaimers, and like this comes with so much love and like understanding of the challenge of it. But yeah, this person was very broke all my mental models of what autistic might look like, and again, probably naive in that. But yes, like beautiful, articulate, self-reflective, and the fact that they were recording on a TikTok to talk about autism, right? Like was unexpected. And so she had a bunch of different stories just talking about her diagnosis and her journey. And I think, yeah, I brought that to you and said, hey, I've been watching these TikToks. I think you might be autistic. Like, what do you think?
And I just started laughing at you, and I was like, I'm literally in this field. Like that's my profession. I mean, I see patients who are autistic, that I've been trained in it. I know what to look for. And so I was like, no, I'm just, an introvert with social anxiety. And fast forward, I've learned the differences, right? And there's some really key differences between the two things. And that was not the case at all. That was incorrect. I was absolutely autistic. So I definitely gave some pushback, I think, for a few days. And you're like, well, and, I think she posted like the AQ and different tests you can take. I'm like, fine, I will take them just to prove to you that this is not accurate. And I scored so high. I scored so high on all of the tests, because then I did a few more, because you can do the AQ, and then I ended up doing a number of other tests, and that really kind of threw me for a loop, because I started reframing so much of my life. Like, wait a second. Because first of all, you think, well, what's wrong with me, right? And at least for me, that was this like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? And then I realized, just like I would tell a patient, there's nothing wrong with you, per se from a brain perspective, but we can balance things out. Ideally, you don't have such a right brain deficit, such a difference between left and right brain. Ideally, you have good vagal tone and these other things. You don't have retained primitive reflexes and whatnot. So I was going through this process of just thinking, back over the years, and everything made so much more sense. So much more sense. And it was really helpful that we've known each other for so long, because I could bring up a scenario from high school and you're like, oh, I remember that, or oh, this, or, even the alexithymia. So I ended up, I think pretty quickly after that, I decided, okay, self-diagnosis is acceptable in this field, but I wanted to get a professional diagnosis, which I ended up deciding to get it from 2 independent people, because again, I wanted to, like, hey, am I actually? And so I decided to seek that out. And that was a long process. That was maybe a 6-month process to go through. It's so much testing, so many different things to make that, official or whatnot. But I didn't want that kind of backing. And again, I know in this whole world of autism and self-diagnosis is very much acceptable. But because I am working in this field, I mean, I'm literally in the field of functional neurology, I wanted that, kind of full confirmation. So it's not my opinion. It's not, anything really on me. So I took those tests multiple times, thinking that maybe I would start scoring less. And I scored within like 1 point every single time. And then I made you take them.
That's right.
Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Because I thought, well, what's actually the accuracy and the validity of these tests?
And
they do take them.
And I do have some like idiosyncrasies that compared to my normal friends feel like they don't do.
For sure.
But yeah, I was like super neurotypical on the results.
According to those, yeah, like for sure not autistic. Maybe some sensory stuff, but for sure not autistic.
Yeah.
So that made me kind of pause, and then I decided to seek out the professional diagnosis.
Yeah, your comment about the reframing, it was really interesting too, of like, being a partner, um, because our eldest son, exhibits some of these sort of
It's really similar to me.
sensitivities, right? And
Total left brain.
I've watched him grow, obviously, from the day he was born, and be so innate with his reactions and so visceral and natural to who he is. And then sort of like, assuming, let's say he's also perhaps high functioning autistic, sort of then mapping of like, oh, holy shit. Like when we take away his favorite toy, or you offer, this is a classic one that I offer him, is, we would say, hey, A or B.
Yeah.
Hey, do you want ice cream? He doesn't really, let's say it's coconut dairy-free ice cream,
Which he never
or,
does, yeah.
gluten vegan, dairy-free cookie, and you present both options to him.
Yeah.
He cannot wrap his head around not having both options now, because you've introduced kind of both concepts, or, I'm just making kind of a situation. And to watch him kind of go through that and just be like, dude, like, it's really simple. It's like everything has a trade-off, A or B, and then thinking about the arguments and fights that we've been in that are similar, but as adults without as much tantrum. Although I'm starting to, quite honestly, reframe some of your behavior occasionally, sometimes through a tantrum. And I know it's not like the right word, but I picture Leo going through that same scenario, and seeing his activation of his emotional.
And that's what it is.
Right.
It really is like this complete visceral reaction that you're going through, and it's creating this overload.
Right.
And you're like, but as an adult, you're supposed to suppress it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't, like, it's still there.
Right.
It's still there.
Right.
Arguably worse, because we will help him kind of walk through it. But for me, especially in the past, it's unacceptable to be angry. It's unacceptable to basically have emotions.
Right.
And so that would all get stuffed, and that's not a good scenario.
Yeah.
And that can certainly show up as a tantrum or a meltdown. I mean, really, some of it is a meltdown. And looking back, some of the times that I've struggled the most, I was going through an autistic burnout and I was having a meltdown. And I just didn't know what it was at the time. And I was just like, what's wrong? What's, hard on myself. What's wrong with you? Why can't you,
Yeah. Yeah. So the reframing piece for me, actually, especially dealing with Leo, because, had this happened maybe before children, maybe that would have, change things. I wouldn't have as much like sort of experience with dealing the rawness of it. But it made me feel a lot closer to you, because I had a lot more empathy. And one of the things, like, to share transparently, is that I think one of the things is you were concerned that I might treat you more childish. And
I was really concerned about that, as my husband. Like, I don't want to be viewed. And we did go through that for a
yes, we did. I was going to say,
talk through it. And it was really difficult, because I didn't, like, stop treating me like a child, or like,
Right.
There was a transition in that.
Yeah. And I think it's something we have to continue to pay attention to, because as someone who's more neurotypical, and as someone like yourself who can experience a meltdown, or a tantrum, for lack of a better word, and it's
meltdown. Let's just call it a meltdown.
It's actually it's a good pausing point for a second. Is that like my background is in technology, building businesses and all these things. Like, I am not particularly medical. And so when we were talking about you doing a potential show and going deep into this, we thought it might be interesting to have me sort of sound as like either the spouse or sort of like the layman viewpoint,
sure,
and allow you to like educate. And so I'm probably going to say incorrect, inappropriate that right. But I actually,
you're trying, and you say it with so much compassion and love, and you're unbelievably open and understanding.
And I'm hoping to bring kind of that piece to these conversations.
And I think there's a lot, what I'm finding in the community in general, there's a lot of women, and they're married to a more neurotypical husband. And I think that's a big part of what has anchored me to be able to be successful in my career and as a mother and all of these different things, because you kind of, anchor me and are a constant and consistent, and I need that. Everyone needs that, but I really feel like I just would like kind of go adrift.
Yeah, and then
Otherwise.
when we've been apart, I mean, there's been some more drifting in that. We're not to say that you like, you're strong on your own as well, but
It takes more, I would say, when I was single. I mean, I opened my own clinic when I was single. I did all of that on my own, but it was, I'm trying to think of it from, it was like sheer willpower, which I have a lot of, and I'm very resilient. I can do it. And I think that's like the best thing. That's one of my best traits. We were filming for another work project recently, and they asked me something to the effect of like, what's one of your best traits? And I said, I'm really fucking resilient. And I think probably most of the females who are being diagnosed in their 20s and 30s, that's probably a common theme, because there was no other option. We were either going to be really fucking resilient, or we were going to, I don't know. I mean, there's really not another option if we want any type of career or success in what's important to us. And career isn't always, the main thing. But there's that. And then you can like push through with willpower. And then there's just being settled in ease and going through, which I feel is where I am now most of the time. And there's times it gets stressful because that's life. But then it's like I can conjure that up. I can pull that part up instead of it always being like that. So it's always like that burnout, meltdown. And I was in a cycle of burnout, meltdown about every 6 months for a long time. I mean, looking back, that's like middle school, high school, college. I mean, it's kind of like, the semester would end and I would be done, like done. And, have some sort of looking back, meltdown, whatever. Because it was always the willpower, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to the diagnosis and sort of the reframing, I think one of the biggest challenges, at least for me, was, where do I sort of give you a pass because you might be neurodivergent?
Yes.
And where do I hold you accountable because you're a human being, you're my partner,
and I want to be held accountable.
Right.
I want growth. I want to get better.
And it's really, and especially when you first are dealing with that, I found myself reassessing everything. Like sometimes we get in fights about the budget. And it's like, is that something I should be like just being like, I'm in control of the budget. I have it. Here's what or do we do it collaboratively? Is that a Melissa thing? Is that a neurodivergent thing? Is that like a spouse thing? Is that a childhood trauma thing? Like
because there's always that layer.
Right. And like and so that was one of my hardest things. But I wanted to ask you is there maybe 2 or 3 things that you like immediately jumped out to that reframe that moment you sort of accepted the diagnoses that were like, hey, you made a comment about the cycle burnouts one. It's like, was there either behaviors or events in your life that just jumped to mind as being like, as soon as you heard this or sort of accepted this diagnosis that were like, oh yeah, like any more jump out to you?
Do you mean like, oh yeah, that's why that happened?
Or like I'm reframing that of like, man, I must have been, you made a comment about eating in the library. We haven't talked about that. I forgot that you ate in the library, and I recall now that you ate in the library, and I never thought about it through the lens of autism, you eating in the library. Right. And like, so just even hearing that's like, oh yeah, you probably were eating in the library, like, because you're autistic. Right. So
high school.
Right. So are there any other of those that just jump out? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's another one around eating. So there's so much around eating because you're already having a sensory experience around eating. And, luckily I don't have any issues around eating. I love being healthy, love nutrition, I was really important for me.
I would say one of your issues, and this, I don't know if you're going there, sorry for interrupting you, is this like, you do have a very binary approach to food, nutrition, and diet.
Yes.
Like,
okay. So I think one thing is it's so simple to me. You've heard this so many times. It's so simple to me. Like, we have one body in this lifetime. That's it. Like, fucking take care of it.
100% agree.
But and I don't think I'm that extreme. I really don't think I'm that extreme.
You're in the top 0.1%.
I mean, no gluten, no dairy. Really don't eat much sugar, but I eat well, high protein, whatever. We're in our mid-30s. We feel great. We work out. Like, it works is my point.
100% works.
So it's my point is that it works. But there's like not much flexibility.
Yeah.
My flexibility is that we'll get like grass-fed burgers from a restaurant.
Right.
Like, that's my mental flexibility.
Right.
And I enjoy that because the thing is, I spent so many years feeling awful.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I grew up headaches, stomach aches, you know, and I did not feel well. And part of that, there's, you know, other things that we can go into, but part of that is that you have that brain imbalance, you have the low vagal tone, you're going to be more sensitive. So when you have low vagal tone, you're more sensitive, you know, cranial nerve 7, all of these things. So I went so long, for so many years, not feeling well. And when I started taking care of myself in, you know, a few different ways, like, I expect to feel great every day, or at least feel really good. You know, like today I'm having allergy stuff. I'm like not feeling great, but that's kind of the extent that I swing to. You know, I expect to not have issues with my digestion, not have issues with my skin, not have, you know, when those things come up, I'm like, oh, something's off, and I'm on it and I deal with it. So when you talk about that narrow range, I just like, I want to feel good. I've heard, you know, an analogy before, I forget what it was. It was something about sort of Princess and the Pea kind of a thing with autism. Like, if there's something bothering you,
Yeah.
But when everything's good, bliss.
Yeah. The Princess and the Pea comment is really interesting because I think one of the things that I've articulated my perception of this journey is I experience those same things that you seem to experience.
Like the discomforts kind of a thing?
You're right. But they're so low. And the analogy I've always used is I always picture like a lake. And I picture a boat in a lake. And someone takes a rock about, you know, this size, like the size of a football. And they drop the rock into the lake. Yeah. And that'll create some ripples for the boat. Not much, but just like if you're sitting in a boat fishing and someone did that next to you, you might be just like a little, like that's it. And I imagine your boat is like a paper boat, the size of, you know, a hamburger. And it's like they drop that rock next to it, and it's like a tsunami, and the wave and the ripple up and the down. It's like 30-foot waves all of a sudden, essentially. Imagine.
Same rock. Yes.
I felt ripples too, but my brain seems to do a much better job just being like, yeah, it's like, who cares? Like, it's like, it reminds me like when you meditate and an idea comes and you sort of let it go. It just feels like that, right? It's just like, oh, there's a beeping. Let it go. And it's just like, no, it's just like, and it's gone.
And meditation really is a whole brain activity.
Yeah, sure.
You know, it's somewhat right brain, but a very whole brain activity. And I love meditating. I have very deep meditation practice. And that's actually one of the things that has helped me in the last probably decade to 15 years to not get so hung up. Is I would think back to, okay, yes, like if I were meditating, I always picture like, you know, a thought coming in on a cloud, and it's fine that it's there, but then it leaves. And so to apply that on kind of this context is really interesting. Right. And it really takes that, you can either do it again through willpower, right? So you can push it through willpower, or you can be in a more balanced cortical and vagal state that it can go through, similar to probably how you experience things.
Mm-hmm. There's this is off the script and off kind of the narrative, but one of the other pieces that I just really, really think of when I think of your journey, and I think this was right around when you were discovering your diagnosis and whatnot, because as you said, it was kind of I almost said the word failed. So this is a good example of like, you tested neurodivergent, and then you went to go get other independence. And there's this gap of like months of like from the moment that
it was like early 2020 to fall 2020.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was like we were like, oh, you failed those. Gosh, sorry, I said failed again. But like you scored high on neurodivergency again. And so it was like, oh, like, yeah, you probably, this is more of a confirmation than it is a debut of the concept. Right. But there was this, must have been a TikTok. Man, I hope they don't shut down TikTok. But there was this journey of these people that would watch a scene And in the scene, it was like, I'm going to make up the scene because I don't quite recall, but it was like the man would like, let's say he was like taking his shirt off because he spilled something on it. And he would say, you know, something like seductive in that, like, oh man, like I really, you know, need to change my shirt, right? But how you could imagine, like, without understanding, well, he was taking, like, he's really muscular, he spills something in his shirt, and he says, like, oh, I need to take my shirt, like, but he's actually taking his shirt off to show his muscles. But like the tone was everything, right? In the moment, because if you said it in like deadpan, like, oh, I have something in my shirt, I have to take it off. Like that tone is a lot different than like, oh, I have to, you know, like this like bravado to it. And it was something like a magnet or some sort of electromagnetic thing.
I do remember, and I think it was over the right cortex. If I recall.
And these people with autism they watched the thing and they were like, oh, he spilled something in his shirt and he had to take it off. That was the story. And then they did this magnet thing on their brain, and the people were like, holy shit, like he was trying to seduce her. And for one woman, it was like insanely profound, because she described it as going through her life seeing in black and white and all the seeing color, and then having to go back to black and white and saying all of this frustration I've experienced in my life, all this confusion, all the fight, all the trauma that I've created, especially
relationally,
right,
and between like a partnership.
And I haven't been seeing the depth in these behaviors, and that to me also blew my mind. And it reframed some of my thing. I was like, holy shit, sometimes you're actually not seeing color in a black and white thing, which just kind of blows my mind, right? And like that gap between neurodivergent and neurotypical people, or I think a lot of animosity, frustration, and all that stuff can brew is in that gap.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll have to pull this back up, but I know there's research on, you know, neurodivergent people are fine in social situations with other neurodivergent people. Neurotypical people are fine in social situations with other neurotypical people. It's the crossover that's like, like how do we function? And that's where like it's draining, and it's, you know, kind of all of that.
Yeah, because it's really frustrating for a neurotypical person as well, because you're like, why are you hung up on this really, really small thing? You know, like I had a coworker and we were like, we'd have these meetings every Tuesday, and the meeting kind of bumped up to lunchtime. And this particular worker would just like lose their shit if like we were like go into lunchtime by 5, 10, 15
Change
minutes.
The schedule.
Right. And so they started bringing snacks, and it was really important that they ate that snack at this time. And like, later on, they were also diagnosed as being autistic. And like, it was just for me, female, kind of high functioning female diagnosis. I was like, oh, like, okay, now that I'm reframing this, your body was more sensitive for the actually needing the food, like
the blood sugar, or like the interoception,
and then that delay and that kickoff kind of would ruin her whole day, right? And like reframing that is like, as a neurotypical, I'm like, grow the fuck up, like
for sure.
We have a big meeting, right? But now that I've reframed it, it's like, okay, like it's just different than how I would operate.
And so in that context, you know, she's someone that there's diagnosis, accepting the diagnosis, working through it, sometimes talk therapy, and then that's it,
they're left to your own devices.
And that's not it. Like that's the key here, is that's not it, right? Because if you're that person, like I've been that person, and the schedule changes and I'm like, oh, settle the fuck down, you can do this, and then the willpower kicks in and I can do it, but I am going to be done for after, right? Where when I have been working on myself, balancing everything out, right? Driving that right brain, working on vagal tone, these different things, I can handle that. And I can just tell myself, okay, yeah. And it's not like the discomfort. Like it's crawl out of your skin. You just want to crawl out of your skin. You know, I could like feel exactly what she was probably feeling in those moments. So if you want to be able to be in those moments and not have those micro meltdowns, basically, like there's other ways. And that's basically, you know, not everyone might be interested in that. But for me, again, someone who wants personal growth, I view that as personal growth for myself. Like that's an area that I want to grow in, and to be more adaptable, and to not have that, because that's completely distracting then from the meeting at hand.
Oh, for sure.
From the work you need to be doing. And I mean, it's important in tech, but for me, if I have, you know, a pediatric brain injury in front of me, like I can't, you know, have a moment like that. I really can't. So I have to keep myself balance. And that's been a big part of this too, is giving myself more grace. And, you're really supportive in that. And sometimes in a really funny way of like, hey, you need some stim pod. Right?
Yeah, you need it bad.
You need to put the Fisher Wallace on your hand. Something like that.
Or like, I can't keep having this conversation until you do that.
Right. And it's true. And then instead of it escalating or being like, no, we're going to, solve this before we go to bed kind of a thing, it's like, let's pause, recalibrate. And a neurotypical person might be able to recalibrate by just walking away. But like for me, it would take 3 days of walking away for my system to reset. Where when I can use these tools, like let's bring in the clinical neuroscience, it can be a matter of, minutes to an hour kind of a thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm back in my body. I'm settled. I'm not feeling all of this anymore. Makes a huge difference. And it's really important for relationships. It's really important for work. But I feel like most people can push through at work. And that's what I found over the years until I started, until this part, is I would push through at work and I'd had nothing left. Or in school, for example, when I was in school. I mean, we got divorced while I was in school. I would push through, nothing left when I got home. That was it.
Are you stimming right now?
Yeah. So.
I just thought if I pointed out, it was just kind of an interesting little moment. Yeah, it's worth noting too. I mean, I don't know how deep to go into this, but yeah, like I have, when we're not securely attached, kind of through attachment theory, like I exhibit more of an anxious attachment. You exhibit more of an avoidant attachment historically.
Yes.
And so it is interesting too, to point like if you're out of whack,
you're more anxious.
So now I want to I want to address these problems now. I want to hug you. I want to I have a touch as a love language. So there's like all this like.
And I'm like.
Right. And if you can get through stim pod and Fisher Wallace and things like that, it's amazing the 180 of like what we can do kind of to resolve that situation.
It keeps us in that right. Attachment, very much so.
And I think I've also learned post diagnosis too, to sometimes like, I don't know, maybe like I don't want us to go to bed angry.
Yeah.
Like, and I think there's maybe been one time in our journey that's been like, but it's been not often that it's like angry. Yeah. But I feel like my bar was like, if anything was slightly off, it was like we kind of had to address it right then. Sure. And now kind of like, and I'm now kind of like, hey, you know what? Like, it's okay. Like, there's some ebbs and flows of like, let's bringing this back, cooling off and connecting. It's
conversation. Like, you don't want to have a pretty serious conversation at 10:45 p.m. when I'm falling asleep and you're expecting a quick answer. And I'm like, what? I need to think through this. I need to think about the details, because this is a funny thing, right? I think through everything and make decisions in my head that I don't tell anyone else about the process. Yeah. Right? Like I do the entire process in my head, and it's a little bit of a tangent, but that comes up. Yeah. So that's been helpful. So it's not necessarily an argument, but it's like, hey, let's have this conversation tomorrow, where that wasn't even an option before. You would be like,
it's happening now.
We need to have this conversation now. And then I would just have a meltdown.
And
it seems like a tantrum, and it seems like I was just being a jerk. And it is kind of being a jerk, but I have very little control over it. And that was what was frustrating, because then you just try to exhibit more control, and you try to have more control in more areas of your life to try to prevent that. And then pretty soon you just try to control everything, and you're just more likely to not at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that might be a good spot to stop for episode 1.
Like, the whole time.
I know. And I'm excited for us to start talking about some of the different, tools, techniques, research, whatever it is, to kind of started working
so many stories.
Yeah, being able to resolve is not the right word. Mitigate some of the the challenges in the moment.
Make things easier.
Yeah.
That's it. Just make life a little bit easier. It doesn't have to be so hard.
So yeah, we'll get ready for episode 2, and thanks for listening. Oh, and I think we're going to have an Instagram account. We don't know the name of it right now.
The Autistic Female.
The Autistic Female.
I have it already.
Oh, we already have it.
No one follows it, but it's there. I haven't debuted it yet.
I mean, we'll be trying to put a lot more like short clips there and whatnot too. So hopefully, if there's something you find interesting on the short clips on Instagram, then we'll try to put a link, to the actual show to go listen to the long form. Yeah, and so that's the intention. Follow along. So thank you.